of our time, and I can tell you that our next speaker is always on the list, whether it be the top 100, the top 500, whatever it is. Jeremy Rifkin is always deemed to be one of the most influential thinkers in the world today. He's got a track record which is amazing. He's written so many books, I've lost count. I believe it's gone past 20. Perhaps his best known and most widely read as a bestseller around the world is The Third Industrial Revolution. A post-carbon world is the one that Jeremy Rifkin has spent much of his recent life thinking about, writing about. He advises governments around the world, including the US government, the European Union, the United Nations he's worked with as well, and a host of other governments too. In essence, he's a man who thinks about the impact of technologies on the way we live on this planet of ours. He has big thoughts, and I'm delighted to say that he's been having some big thoughts about agriculture in the third industrial revolution. So without further ado, and with all of you coming in who want to come in, please do take a seat. Please give a very warm welcome to Jeremy Rifkin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Well, listen, GDP is slowing all over the world, every country. Productivity is waning all over the world, every nation. Unemployment's high all over the world, very few exceptions. We are beginning to glimpse the sunset of one of the great economic eras in world history. But we're also beginning to see the sunrise of a new economic paradigm. To understand the crisis and the opportunity, we need to get a fix on how the great economic paradigm shifts in history occur. They all share a common denominator, interestingly. At a given moment of time, three new technologies come together and converge to create what we call in engineering a general purpose technology platform. A new infrastructure for reorganizing economic life. What are those three defining technologies? And think about this for agriculture. New communication technologies to more efficiently manage our economic activity. New sources of energy to more efficiently power our economic activity. New forms of transportation to more efficiently move our economic activity. Every economic paradigm is about managing, powering, and moving economic life across the value chains. Agriculture is no exception. First industrial revolution, 19th century Britain, the introduction of steam power printing and the telegraph, those communication technologies converged with cheap coal, powered by steam engine, and then the Brits put it all on locomotives and rail systems, communication, energy, transport. 20th century, second industrial revolution, the United States, communication, energy, and transport. Centralized electricity, the telephone, later radio and television, converge with cheap Texas oil, powered by internal combustion engines. Then Henry Ford put everybody on the road, cars, buses, and trucks, transportation, logistics. The second industrial revolution took us through the 20th century. It peaked in July 2008 when Brent crude oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets. If you remember that month, all the prices for everything we buy went through the roof because everything's pegged to fossil fuels. Purchasing power shut down. We are now in a long 30 to 40 year sunset for that second industrial revolution platform of centralized telecommunication, fossil fuel nuclear power, internal combustion transport on dumb road and rail. We are now on the cusp of a third industrial revolution. I just came back from Berlin where I joined the vice chancellor and the foreign minister, and we had nations, 60 countries there on the German transition. New convergence of communication, energy, and transport. The communication internet, which has matured, is now in Germany beginning to converge with a distributed, digitalized, renewable energy internet and an automated GPS-guided and soon driverless transport and logistics internet to create three super internets in one kernel: communication, energy, transport. That kernel is atop a new platform we call the Internet of Things. So sensors are being established in every device and every machine so they can talk to each other and send data back to these three internets that allow us to manage, power, and move economic activity. Sensors in the agricultural fields are now monitoring our crops, sending data back. Sensors in warehouses and distribution centers can tell us how our food is moving toward the factory and processing. We have sensors now embedded in the retail stores, so we know what's going on moment to moment with our product lines. We have sensors in smart homes and now in smart cars, all sending data across the system. Here's what this means, potentially. 3 billion people connected today to the Internet of Things. It means anybody, we all have a value chain. Individuals, families, businesses, we're always marshaling economic activity and moving it and storing it and producing it and consuming it and recycling it. The Internet of Things platform allows any of us to go up on that platform, small business, large company, government, cooperative, and we can cut our value chain out. We can literally cut our swath of the value chain out and watch our data that we care about in our business. We can then use analytics with that big data, use analytics to create our own algorithms, our own apps, so that we can dramatically increase our aggregate energy efficiency across every conversion of our value chain, so we can actually reduce our marginal cost and be competitive in a new digital economy, a third industrial revolution. This is a big leap forward for productivity, and it's a big leap forward for the environment because the digitalization will allow us with the analytics to constantly find ways to use less resources more efficiently so we can actually get the marginal cost down. This is the only way I know to really quickly reduce our ecological footprint. It has huge implications for the agricultural industry because the management, powering, and moving of the food products from the fields to the final user is absolutely essential to that value chain. So, this means that if you're on the agricultural fields, the farmers are going to be able to use with sensors and understand the data coming from the crops, be able to move in their food products to the market and find a way to actually take it all the way to the end consumer. But let me say there's a problem here. And that is, even though this new Internet of Things for a third industrial revolution is going to allow the food industry and every other industry to dramatically increase efficiencies at their conversions and reduce their marginal cost, can we get there in time? The elephant in the room is climate change. This is not a issue. This is the defining issue of the human race as to whether we can survive on this planet. And interestingly enough, the first impact of climate change is on agriculture. So this is the wild card here. What is never explained by our scientists, unfortunately, is why climate change matters. It changes the water cycle of the Earth. This is the watery planet. Our ecosystems have developed over millions of years based on the water regimes in the cloud covers of the Earth. For every 1 degree that the temperature goes up from industrial-induced climate change, the atmosphere is actually sucking up 7% more precipitation from the ground. The heat forces that precipitation up into the clouds. We're getting more concentrated precipitation in the clouds and more dramatic water events. Blockbuster winter snows, and then more spring flooding, and then more summer droughts, and then more Category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes. Our ecosystems cannot catch up to this dramatic runaway shift in the water cycles, and the first victim is the agricultural production of food for the human race. Our food production forecasts show that it will plunge over the next 40 years. We now have whole areas of the world, from California to Pakistan, from Sao Paulo to Europe, where we're getting the floods, the droughts, and this is not going away. And ironically, what's caused a great deal of this climate change is our food production and agricultural system. We always talk about how we have to change the way we build our cities, change the way we transport ourselves, but we never have a discussion about the fact that agriculture today is responsible for 1/3 of the global warming gases on this planet, and it's never discussed in public policy. It's bizarre. 1/3 of all of the global emissions comes out of agriculture. It starts with chemical agriculture. We have been awash in chemical agriculture since the end of World War II. And it begins with the fertilizers. Those are made out of fossil fuels. And when we create those fertilizers from fossil fuels in the factories, it emits CO2. Then we place those fertilizers, which are made out of fossil fuels, across all of our agricultural lands all over the world. And then they emit nitrous oxide the moment we put them down. And nitrous oxide is 296 times more potent than CO2. So imagine all those petrochemical fertilizers are washed all over the agricultural fields. They're emitting nitrous oxide as I speak. And then we have a problem that we've moved a lot of our food production from food grain to feed grain so we can support a diet high up on the meat chain for the wealthy middle class of the world. Most people would be shocked to know that 40% of the agricultural land on this planet that's left is used to grow feed for animals. And the FAO and ICGR say that by 20 years from now, 60% of the remaining agricultural land will be growing feed for animals, leaving 40% for the human race. They can't even afford it, the poor. And that shift from food to feed grain allows us to support beef production and consumption on a massive scale and other related animal husbandry. We've got 1.3 billion cows out there. They're taking up 23% of the land mass. They're emitting massive amounts of methane, both in the belching and in the manure. All of this has been studied. There's so many scientific reports from FAO and everyone else, and no one ever reads them, and the media never reports on it. Methane is 23 times more potent than CO2. So our shift for 60 years into chemical agriculture, the shift from food to feed to support a very limited meat diet for the wealthy, very inefficient, and it's leading to more and more emissions in global warming. So what do? We have to introduce this Internet of Things platform for a third industrial revolution, but to increase our aggregate energy efficiencies and productivity and reduce our marginal costs, we have to make some big changes in agriculture. First, number one, we have to move from chemical-based fertilizers and pesticides to ecological-based organic agriculture. The science is there, the ecology is there, the yields are there, and farmers are making that transition across Europe and the world, and it's the fastest growing consumer market. The problem is we need to scale it. And if you're a farmer, you probably would like to do organic because it's better prices, but you can't because it takes 7 years to leave your land fallow so that you can get the chemicals out, at least in my country, and then get certified. With all the subsidies we provide for agriculture in the European Union, why not take some of those subsidies and turn them into incentives so that our farmers can lay fallow their land for 7 years, rid it of the chemicals that create climate change, and allow them to create and scale up organic agriculture at a lower price for a growing market. This is just good business sense, not tomorrow morning, but over the next 20 years. Same in the developing world. This goes in both places. Secondly, we need to begin to introduce onto the farms a complete program for self-sustaining energy. Every farm should be incentivized with the help of the European Union to put solar panels on the roofs of all their buildings, put in the geothermal heat, put in the bioconverters to convert all of that biological material back to energy, to be self-sufficient both off-grid or send energy back to the grid. There's no excuse for a farm not being completely self-sufficient, and this energy is zero marginal cost. In other words, once you pay the fixed cost, the marginal cost of producing the sun, the wind, they don't send a bill. The sun doesn't send a bill over your land, or the wind, or the geothermal heat. It's free, just maintain the technology. If you're a farmer, you know that one of the biggest costs is the energy in your machinery, your processing, the technology. You shouldn't have to pay more than zero marginal cost. Let the EU help you not only make the transition to organic agriculture, but let's provide the incentives here so that we can make the transition so farms are self-sufficient, can produce their own energy on the energy internet and send the surplus back and make some money in doing it. And finally, we're going to have to change our diet. This is tough. I know Al Gore doesn't even want to talk about this, but we're going to have to change our diet. It's absurd that we are eating high up on this food chain. The inefficiencies are enormous. The amount of grain that is required to produce a pound of meat could produce 10 times more protein if we used it with vegetables. It's much more inefficient than the internal combustion engine in our moribund old buildings. So we're going to need to find a way to move back from incentivizing feed grain to incentivizing food grain. And we're going to need to have a healthy discussion in the EU, and I mean healthy, on lowering our food expectations on the food chain. Good for our health, good for the environment, good for agriculture, good for the planet. These are difficult discussions, I know, but I have to say to you, it's amazing to me that agriculture has had a past for 30 years. You know, transport did not want to make the shift, and there was a lot of blowback on moving to electric and fuel cell vehicles and renewable energies, but they made the shift, and now they're finding there are new business opportunities that are enormous. And their abilities to take advantage of these opportunities are now here. The transmission electricity companies didn't want to make the shift. Now, companies like E.ON and others are making that shift, and they're finding new business opportunities in the process. The building industry did not want to create LEED standards to try to make the buildings more efficient, but they did do that, and now they're finding there are more opportunities, more efficiencies, better productivity. Agriculture now needs to have that discussion. I know it's beginning, but we got to open the door wide. We have tremendous expertise in Europe with our life science companies and our scientific community. That expertise should help us now make a very intelligent, long-term transition in Europe out of the old petrochemical agriculture into organic and ecological agriculture, make our farms sufficient and energy efficient by allowing them to produce their own energy on site, move us back from feed grade to food grain. And if Europe doesn't do this, then how do we say to the world we're trying to move us out of a carbon era? If our agriculture in Europe is still subsidized and underwritten by fossil fuels, and fossil fuels. It is actually an inconsistency in the European doctrine. And so if we want to meet our 2020 goals, our 2030 and our 2050 goals to head to a third industrial revolution, it's obvious that what we need to do here is have a healthy discussion about those subsidies. I'm in favor of the incentives. I'm in favor of helping the farmers, the life science companies, the food processors, the retailers, and the consumers. Let's change our priorities so that we incentivize a transition out of chemical farming, back from feed to food, let the farmers get self-sufficient in their energy and transport and logistics, and make the European food system the flagship for what needs to be done all over the world. If we can do that, agriculture, instead of being, if you will, the poster child for global warming, can become the poster child for a more ecological, a more sustainable agriculture that can reheal the planet, replenish our abilities to allow future generations to live with security on this earth. I'm hoping that in this room we start this discussion this afternoon, and that we show the world that Europe's capable of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, and that is moving agriculture out of carbon and into a post-carbon, sustainable, renewable era. Good for business, good for Europe, most important, good for our children and the planet we live in. Thank you.
No, that's great. Jeremy, thank you, and take a seat. Take a seat wherever you like, there's plenty of them. You said it was going to be challenging for all of us, and it was challenging. I'm going to ask you one question, then I'm going to open it straight up for questions from the audience. Is your assumption that, I mean, you're saying this is urgent, you know, given the emissions record of agriculture, change is urgent. Do you anticipate that there will be drop-offs in levels of productivity if the change is delivered rapidly, i.e. if more organic solutions are introduced and all of the rest of the things that you say need to be introduced, is there bound to be a drop-off in productivity?
I think we'll see a dramatic increase in productivity because by connecting the farm, the life science, the processors, the retailers, the consumers, with an Internet of Things platform, the digitalization of that platform means that any farmer with a laptop, and a mobile device can go up on that Internet of Things platform, we're already starting, and get a transparent picture of the data they want on their value chain so they can increase their aggregate efficiencies on the farm and on the shipment, et cetera, of their goods into the product, to the market. So this leap forward, where it's not just industry will take advantage of the Internet of Things, it's the agricultural community from the farmer all the way to the final retailers and consumers. So I think it's a leap forward. I think we need to incentivize the transition. We need to help the farmers, the life science companies. We need to help the wholesalers and retailers incentivize. Why put all of our subsidies in an old second industrial revolution platform in any industry where the telecommunications, the energies, the transport and logistics is moribund? Why not prioritize it for agriculture and other industries to put that investment in a third industrial revolution platform?
And one other quick thought from me, and then I promise I'll shut up. You work with governments on all sorts of technological challenges. You've worked a lot with the German government on pushing through a real fundamental shift in energy policy. Now, that's been driven by government. Angela Merkel put her neck out and she drove that change. Is it your contention, when you come to things like saying, we need to change our diet, is it your contention that governments are going to have to tell people and enforce the notion that they will eat less meat?
I think that it's a matter of how we perceive our responsibility to each other and the planet we live in. You can't force people by legislation to change their diet. But we do have the responsibility, if we know that our diet is having an adverse effect in increasing our ecological footprint and creating climate change, we need to talk about it. And here's what I think is a healthy discussion that's happening. We've got a lot of 14-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids all over the world coming home, and they're understanding ecological footprint. They're saying, why is the TV on to their parents? We're not watching it. Why using so much water to Dad while you're shaving? We're wasting the water. And the one I like, a lot of kids, even in Germany, they're coming home now in Germany, and they're saying, where'd this piece of beef come from on my plate? Because the kids are learning that that piece of beef may have come from a rainforest where they destroyed the trees for 3 inches of topsoil to graze the cow. And the kids learn that those trees are habitats for wild species that only live in those tree canopies. They become extinct. And then what the kids know is if the trees are destroyed to graze the cow for the piece of beef on their plate, the trees are no longer a sink to absorb CO2 from industrial activity, and then for the temperature of the planet goes up, and a farmer has droughts, floods and droughts and can't feed their kids. So the kids are learning that everything they do has an intimate impact on everyone else, every other ecosystem, and the biosphere we live in. This is the beginning of a new generation that understands their connectivity. And so you can't legislate changes in diet, but certainly we are at the beginning of a cultural shift where we can understand that the need to change our lifestyle is important. Look at car sharing. We've got millions of kids in the last 5 years who have moved from ownership to access to mobility. And for every car shared, we're eliminating 15 cars from production. And these kids are now going to be in cars that are electric. They're going to be fuel cell. They're going to be powered by renewable energy. This is a way that you can't legislate car sharing, but you can encourage it with this Internet of Things platform that's emerging. So I think it's a matter of a healthy discussion.
Good. Well, healthy discussion we're all in favor of. And in that spirit, let's try and take 3 or 4 questions. Jeremy doesn't have so long with us, but we'll try and get 3 or 4 in as long as they're brief. We'll start with you, sir, then we'll come to you. But let's get a microphone over here. Just name and quick question.
Thank you. My name is Otto von Arnold from Sweden. When you're talking about ecological agriculture, do you also want a change in the view of looking of the new biological techniques? Not mentioning GMOs, but something like it.
You mean, well, you say
you're talking about the new technologies?
GMOs, but you mean embracing bioscience in a new way.
I'm glad you brought that up. I just had an opportunity to be in a panel with the chairman of Syngenta. This is a good example. The life sciences are developing. It used to be, it was all chemical agriculture. And then the life science emerged with the new biological sciences. The first generation of those technologies, GMOs, they had a problem. It wasn't just that the public had a problem with them, there's a problem in the science that was being used because they were taking genes from unrelated species and stitching them into the genetic makeup of other species, and it raised environmental health and safety questions. However, the second generation, I would call it Life Science 2.0 technology, is called marker-assisted selection. And Syngenta and other companies have pioneered this. Here, you don't take genes from an unrelated species and place them into the crop, which gives you a potential risk factor, but instead, you only increase breeding within a species. In other words, we use the genomic information, for example, about asparagus. So we can find those varieties of asparagus that have different traits that we like and breed them with other kinds of asparagus to increase our ability to move on classical breeding with the technology available in genomics. Marker-assisted selection is a step forward. And it also, we find, is more effective in the fields because we know that single gene changes don't actually perform well in the long run, but if you cluster genes in their larger makeup, you're going to get the full benefits of what that contribution can make. So I think we need to encourage the life sciences, not only to begin to move us into this better breeding cycle, but we need the life science companies to bring in the ecological sciences so that we have a much more systemic approach to agriculture, so we learn how to blend our food crops so that they fit the local environment, so that they work with the natural pests, so they work with the flora and fauna, so that it's a system that works together. That's better than the old system where douse the chemicals, everything, kill it, so that the crop stays alive. That is not a good way or a sophisticated way to approach agriculture in the future.
All right, there was a question here, sir.
My name is Piet Bonenkamp from Wageningen in the Netherlands. I think I agree with a little bit with your third revolution if you talk about staples and animal production, but I think you forgot a complete part of food, and that is food and nutrition, and it has to deal with fresh vegetables. And fresh vegetables is what we all need to eat to be healthy, and that's actually transporting water, 95% of water. So the idea is not to grow that organic, but to grow that in the cities with the high greenhouse type of high-tech systems where you don't have transport. You can do that in enclosed surroundings without any emissions, and also the energy that you can use immediately in the buildings. Yeah. So I miss that completely in your talk, actually.
I think that I'm interested in vertical farming, indoor and vertical farming. I think there's some possibilities. I also think that we have got to move back to the idea of regional farming for regional markets. You know, there's an analogy here with industry. Back in the 80s, we decided to outsource our manufacturing to the developing world where we had cheap labor, no environmental standards, and the cost reduction allowed us to then ship the final products back to the developed world, and even with those costs of transport, it was still cheaper. Well, that's all changed now, because the new generation of digital manufacturing, high precision manufacturing, 3D printing, infofacturing, and automation is allowing us to bring manufacturing right back to our own regions because we're finding ways to dramatically increase productivity and reduce the marginal cost with third industrial revolution infofacturing and automated manufacturing. Same in agriculture. We now have the science available to move our agriculture back to local regions that serve local markets. And I'm a big fan of community-supported agriculture because the Internet of Things will allow farmers to directly, in some cases, contract with consumers on a laterally scaled internet, they're doing it around the world, and create the economies of scale where they can eliminate a lot of the middlemen and reduce the price and go directly to the final consumer. So these are among some of the alternatives.
That doesn't help the farmer in Kenya who, can only survive by reaching out to markets in Europe, for example.
I'm glad you raised that, because the problem, if you take a look at in the developing world, much of the grain that they're producing is feed grain for animals that exports to the meat markets in the developed world. It's not food grain for their families and communities. So I would advocate that we begin to incentivize in the developing world a shift back from feed grain for foreign export to the rich to food grain so that they can then create their local markets, their regional and continental markets, and grow food for their own regions and their own continents at lower cost and with higher degree of self-sufficiency.
All right, Jeremy, you're great because you talk concisely and quickly, which is important. You know what, I want to be fair to people at the back because it's so much easier to see hands at the front, but if there are any hands up at the back, I do want to make sure you get a fair shake. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question on the upper tier? Because if so, now is your opportunity. We have about 5 minutes left. Because if not, I know there are questions down the front again, but sorry, am I being dumb? Is there anybody at the back with a hand up? I can't see. Well, you don't quite count, sir, but you'll do. I just meant the upper tier, but you'll do as you've got the mic. Yep, go on.
Monsieur le Président, en français, si vous le permettez, je me pose des questions.
I don't know. Jeremy, do you speak from no?
Vous m'entendez pas?
We don't have translation kits. Is there any way you can ask it in English? So I'm sorry to be so monolingual.
No, sorry. French uniquement.
That's terrible. This is awful. We're in Brussels and we can't even take a question in French. This is a disaster.
Sorry.
I'm so embarrassed. Have we got I'll tell you what, sir, we'll get to you in a minute, but in the meantime, you had a question, sir, and then we'll come back to the question in French when we've got some translation kits. Yeah, go on, sir.
Very fast, just very interesting theory you had there. Very interesting to listen, to see how this could be maintained, let's say an organic type of farming. But how does it fit in? I mean, Europe today, if we would do the change, let's say inside the next 10, 20 years, during that period, we would not be most probably able to export anything at all and feed the world. Who would then take care of that? Does that mean that somebody else would have to intensify even more to agriculture? And would we then even had actually obtain the objective?
Why are you saying that there will be a 10-year moratorium on exports? Why?
Just that we heard this morning that here is a lot of food. There is about 850 million people undernourished in the world. Europe is a big exporter of cereals and also agricultural products. Yeah. If we would then start this kind of a transition, most probably to affect our yields and our productivity.
But I asked him that, and Jeremy said it wouldn't. He said productivity is going to soar, not decline.
I have my own doubts that in 2-3 years it would be like that. But let's say it did. What would happen to the rest of the world? Somebody else had to intensify.
Well, he's not buying the idea that you have, that yields will soar, productivity will rise. And he's saying,
know what? That's I've got to say that you need to be a little more bullish about the cutting-edge technologies moving in the life sciences here in agriculture, because there's no reason why the agriculture should fall behind the other industries. I noticed that IBM and Cisco just did a study on the future projections of the Internet of Things platform for a third industrial revolution. And I think as IBM said, $14 trillion in energy efficiency and productivity savings. GE said, that's by 2021 or 2. GE said by 2025, over half the global economy will be impacted by the efficiencies and productivity. Why would agriculture be the lone industry that did not take advantage of and be rewarded by injecting itself into an Internet of Things platform and moving along the lines that I've said? It will. Right. And I'll just say one last thing about it. The energy cost, the transport cost, the logistics cost, the cost of chemical farming is through the roof. That's why farmers have a hard time staying afloat. If we can move off the chemicals from fossil fuels, if we can move to renewable energy so the farmers can produce their own at zero marginal cost, if we can move to electric and fuel cell transport to transport those products to market, that's a vast increase in productivity, not tomorrow morning, but it'll start tomorrow morning. It was already there in Germany. It's already there in Denmark. There's no reason it shouldn't be in every other country in the EU. And I will say this. Every country in the EU that is still in the second industrial revolution platform, from agriculture to manufacturing, that infrastructure in 20 years from now will be out of the game. Because every country in a third industrial revolution Internet of Things platform, from agriculture to manufacturing, can plug and play into the platform and dramatically increase their efficiencies and productivity and operate with near zero marginal cost renewable energy and very low marginal cost automated transport and logistics. So the question is not the money.
All right.
One last thing. The money thing is really interesting because the money is there. We spent $741 billion in 2012 in the EU on infrastructure. That wasn't a bad year. It simply went into the old second industrial revolution infrastructure that has no productivity left. So all we need to do is reprioritize and put some of that investment in this new infrastructure and make sure agriculture is part of the equation, not left out. Incentivize it, help agriculture be part of this new era.
Okay. Super. All right. Monsieur, excusez-moi, mais s'il vous plaît, posez votre question maintenant.
Excusez-moi.
And I apologize to all French speakers.
Je vis dans les Ardennes brabançonnes, près de Bruxelles, et dans mon petit patelin, dans mon petit
No, I
hameau.
can't. Attendez, s'il vous plaît, monsieur. Qu'est-ce que c'est le numéro pour l'anglais?
Ah, sorry. Quelqu'un peut traduire?
All right. Is it working on yours?
No. Has anybody got one of these? What number am I supposed to be on?
En anglais, c'est le numéro? Il n'y a pas de numéro. Non.
Try again, sir.
Bon.
Essay. Oh, there's no.
Je peux y aller? Ça ira?
Translation
Il y a une
Okay, well,
possibilité?
you have a go. Let's see if I can translate for you. My French is not great, but I'll try.
Y a-t-il
Nom
une
de mon, s'il vous
possibilité?
plaît, monsieur.
Oui, mon nom est Karl Van Doorn. Je me pose des questions par rapport au nombre important de la disparition des petites fermes. Il y en avait ici, chez nous, en Belgique, 4 fermes par jour disparaissent au profit des toutes grandes fermes, des fermes de plus de 1000 hectares. Est-ce que notre président, notre orateur de ce jour, pense que l'avenir passe aussi par le retour des petites exploitations agricoles qui, elles, peuvent fournir de l'emploi locaux, des emplois et des produits de qualité?
Je
Merci.
comprends. Merci. You're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but in essence, the gentleman is from Belgium. He's saying that there's a crisis for local farmers in Belgium. Up to 4 local farms are, I meant small. Small farms are closing down, are going bust every day. And it is very difficult for him to understand how everything you're talking about is going to help maintain small farms in countries like Belgium.
You know, we had a panel just before this, and the point was made that most of the farming in the world is very small farm holders responsible, very small farms around the world, for over 60% of the production in the world. Very tiny, under 2 hectares. The Internet of Things platform for a third industrial revolution rewards lateral economies of scale. Let me have you understand this. The first and second industrial revolution platforms for communication, energy, and transport, which everyone has to use, every business, had to spawn vertically integrated enterprises that could put everything under one roof, because the amount of investment you needed to enter and the profits you needed required vertical integration. So it favored big agribusinesses, big vertically integrated companies, and the farmers had to move to be agri-farmers, or they were increasingly marginalized out of the market. The third industrial revolution platform, its architecture, if you use the internet, the architecture is designed to be distributed, not centralized, collaborative, not vertically integrated, laterally scaled. All right, so it rewards lots of small farmers coming together in cooperatives, laterally scaling their energy, their transport, their logistics, and all of the necessary things on the farm, and they can do it more efficiently at a lower marginal cost than a handful of giant vertically integrated companies. We are seeing this in other industries. For example, in energy in Germany, we're at 27% green electricity. We're going to be at 35% by 2020 and 100% by 2040. Who's producing it? What happened to the big 4 power companies, EnBW, RWE, E.ON, and Vattenfall, is what happened to the music industry, newspapers, magazines, book publishing, zero marginal cost. We now have thousands and thousands of small producers, farmers, consumers, co-ops who have joined together in electricity cooperatives. Every one of them got loans from the banks because the banks knew they'd pay back from the energy savings. They're producing the vast majority of the electricity. So in Germany, we're seeing the democratization of energy at near zero marginal cost. Shouldn't every farmer be able to produce their own energy at near zero marginal cost and reduce their costs so they can stay in business? So if anything, this was the most important question this afternoon, because this rewards small farmers all over the world. The entry into the internet is $25 smartphone. And that exists now. That's the entry into the internet. A $25 smartphone, you're on the Internet of Things platform.
Wow. Well, that's a great way to end, because I'm delighted we've heard from the small farmers, and you've told us the future belongs to the small farmers. So let's see, maybe next year we'll reconvene and decide whether that looks like it's turning out to be correct. But It's been a fascinating session, Jeremy. I thank you very much for doing it. I've had you on the Hard Talk show, and that was terrific, and I've had you on this now, and that was terrific too. So, ladies and gentlemen, give Jeremy Rifkin a very warm hand. Thank you, Jeremy, very much indeed.